everyone, it's Tony Robbins. Listen, this is part of our program on understanding what's happening with COVID-19, with coronavirus. The whole purpose of this program is to bring you some of the greatest experts in the world to share with you what's really going on versus maybe the hype or the fear that's out there. And most importantly, to talk to you about how we can get our handle around this, get people back to work, and what are the solutions short-term and perhaps long-term in terms of vaccine. In today's program, we're going to do it together along with my dear friend, Peter Diamandis, my partner. Peter, how are you doing out there? We're doing this by Zoom.
I'm doing great, buddy. I'm doing well and excited. In part one of this program, we had another dear friend, Dr. Bob Haruri, who's the CEO, chairman of Singularity. And if you haven't seen part one of this program, I encourage you to go. It's extraordinarily rich. The first part talking about how the numbers are proving this pandemic to be perhaps nowhere near as bad as it was, where the mortality rates are not 3, 4, 5%, and they may be, in some case, the consideration of a bad flu. We'll find that out over the days ahead. But in addition, Tony and I double-clicked with Bob about how we can augment our immunity, how natural killer cells and stem cells derived from the placenta may be an incredible tool, not only for the COVID-19 pandemic, but for future ones to come. So check that out. It's one of hope and optimism. And the second half of this program right now is for the other parts of what we should be thinking about. How do we diagnose this? And once it's diagnosed, how do we get vaccines in place? And we've got two incredible co-CEOs, co-founders of a company called United Biomedical and COVAXX. Reese and Mei Mei are the co-founders and co-CEOs of United Neuroscience. As you'll hear, it's a 30-year-old company, one of the leading companies on the planet, both in diagnostics and vaccines, and of a new company I'm proud to be a board member, full disclosure of, called COVAXX, which has taken all of the assets from United Biomedical that are around the coronavirus and put it into this US-based company. Mei Mei, a Harvard Law School law graduate, Lou, a many times over entrepreneur and one of the top thinkers that I know in disruptive thinking. They have become dear friends and they're on a mission. And Tony, this is a mission that you and I love, which is how do you demonetize and democratize these treatments? So we don't have these things are available to everyone around the world, not at thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars, but potentially single digit dollars to treat people and protect people.
And that sounds like huge claims, but maybe what we could start with, Mei Mei, is tell us a little bit about, United Biomedical and your 30-year history and the volume in which you guys have produced vaccines and the impact that it's had, so that people know this is not some quick little startup with some people who have pie in the sky. You guys have produced pretty amazing results. Can you give us a little history?
Yeah, sure, Tony. So United Biomedical is probably one of the oldest biotech companies that you've never heard of. It's been around for over 30 years. We've been privately held, and we're still privately held. We got our start actually in diagnostics. So our chief scientific officer and founder, Chang Yi, actually developed and commercialized the first ever peptide-based diagnostic. That was for HIV, HCV. She's created a number since, and we developed and manufactured and then distributed through worldwide partners for the last over 20 years. So it's not new to us. And then these have sold, tens of millions. They've been sold to governments to help clean their blood banks, their blood supplies. And so it's something that we have good experience in. And in fact, a large part of our company is actually in Taiwan and China. So we were one of the first people to respond to the SARS epidemic almost 20 years ago. And it was that kind of experience that gave us a head start when COVID-19 came down. And so when we saw it again, we knew that we could do something. And so we decided to jump in. In terms of the vaccine platform, we also developed the first ever fully synthetic peptide vaccine. And it's been commercialized against an infectious disease in animals. So we now vaccinate about 25% of the world's pigs, which is about 500 million doses a year, or now almost 5 billion doses sold worldwide. So we know how to scale up. It's a very accessible platform. And we basically put those tools and are now turning it to COVID-19.
So Lou, maybe you can share with us what's the strategy that's different around the testing. We all know to get back to work, one of the biggest challenges with the swab test or the PCR test, I guess it is this idea that you're swabbing and you're only discovering whether or not the virus is in you right now versus an antibody test where we can see whether you've been exposed and whether you've built antibodies that could actually say that you can go back out in the world because your immune system can handle it. Tell us the differences in the test, the differences in the accuracy. And there's a couple antibody tests that have been mentioned recently. Some that have been said the government's not supporting. I understand you guys got FDA approval. Give us a sense of the difference in the tests and what you're trying to accomplish first with the testing as a whole.
Yeah, so the idea here is that if you can actually find out if people have durable antibodies, they can safely go back to work. And if you can find out how many people are exposed, you can find out the true rate of morbidity and mortality associated with COVID-19. So our test is an IgG specific, and I don't mean to get in the weeds, IgG specific antibody test. And the difference between ours and the other ones, to be simple and direct about it, is accuracy, right? So when you go after both IgM and IgG antibodies, you might be able to detect a couple days earlier, but you're loaded with false positives because you detect people that have any other type of coronavirus or certain rhinoviruses, autoimmune disorders, anything like that can flare up the test. And that's why you see these very large number of false positives. So what we need is information that's highly specific and accurate and therefore actionable. And that's what we do with our test.
And what makes the PCR test so weak is the process that explain to us why that test is inferior to an antibody test, just so that the layman can understand the importance of this.
So I think, Tony, you said it really well a minute ago. You cannot have the antibody test and see if you've been exposed in the past. You can only see if you're actively carrying the virus right then. And it's detecting viral DNA, like the actual virus in your nose or in your throat. And so it's a very different type of test. So it wouldn't be able to tell you if you have immunity and you can get back to work.
Got it. You were about to say, Peter?
Yeah, I was going to say, first of all, important to note that there's a version of a coronavirus that is causing the COVID-19 pandemic, right? The coronavirus has been around for a long time. It's the virus that causes the common cold. It's the particular variation of this SARS-CoV-2 that is causing this pandemic. And so you can't confuse the two. Mei Mei, you're in the labs right now of COVAXX. Again, COVAXX is the company that was spun out of United Biomedical. It holds all of the assets and both the testing and the vaccines. Can you go a little bit into the science of what the diagnostics, what is an antibody test, a little bit more detail versus a PCR?
Yeah, sure. So I think Lou did a nice job where, PCRs, there's a good use for them, right? And at the end of the day, when we're fighting in this, you need lots of tools in the toolbox. And so the PCR has its own benefits. It can detect, who has an active infection in that moment and who needs medical treatment immediately and who needs to be quarantined. What an antibody test does is it actually, whenever your body is exposed to a virus, it starts fighting it off and it generates antibodies against it to neutralize it. So what our antibody test does is actually just detects those antibodies against SARS-CoV-2. There are a couple different types of antibodies. One is the first wave called IgM, and then there's a second wave called IgG, which are these longer lasting antibodies that last for months and months after you're initially exposed. And those are the ones where if you're re-exposed, they help quell the virus so that it's either milder or you don't even feel it. Hence immunity. So what our test is you'll see and probably read about lots of antibody tests on the market, and they're kind of a couple different types. One are these rapid tests. They look like home pregnancy tests kind of thing, and you pop the little prick of blood in them. And they have their use too. They're probably convenient. They seem convenient. They could be used at point of care. But like Lou said, these are less accurate, and as a result, they're less useful for really studying the disease on a mass scale. A lot of times, they actually
how much less accurate? What are the numbers being discussed out there with the false positives and false negative rates?
When you look at the sensitivity and specificity, it's usually between 80 and 90%. And it doesn't seem like much, but when you're testing millions and millions of people, that's a lot of numbers of people. And so when you actually do a seroprevalence study, if you had, let's say, you can essentially, with that type of disparity, you can be off by a factor of 3, which in some ways, if you're making public health decisions, is difficult. So the other thing with those tests is, they're difficult to deploy and centralize. So a lot of times, because of the accuracy and that difficulty, they actually have to be confirmed with lab tests. So our test is a very basic ELISA test. It's old technology, but very cool reagents. And what makes us kind of different is the type of reagents we use to make it more accurate and specific. So we can absolutely differentiate between SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, and other naturally circulating coronaviruses in the US. We're also very high throughput. So I have this plate here, but it's basically like a simple 96 well plate. So each one is like a specimen, and these can be put into a machine and automatically run. So you're talking about 96 tests in about 2 to 3 hours. Just to compare.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
I was just going to say that there's machines that can run 8 or 10 of those at a time. So that means in a 2-hour period of time, you're running through literally thousands of the individual tests.
And ELISA is a platform that already exists around the world, so it makes it deployable in a greater tempo, correct?
Exactly. I mean, we have the capacity to run millions and millions of tests worldwide a day based on the labs that already have basic ELISA capabilities. So it's a very high throughput, highly scalable test, and should be used for mass screening. Yep.
What's the price point that COVAXX is going to be providing these tests to folks for?
So it's definitely cheaper than the PCR and other rapid tests. Depending on scales, between $5 and $21.
Now you're doing these tests. I know, you both live in Telluride. I know you're obviously your facilities are in New Jersey, the medical facilities and so forth. But you decided to do a test that was going to be open to the community there. And part of the challenge we're having with these numbers, the original numbers coming out of Wuhan were 3.5%, 4.5%. Some people are projecting 5%. And we closed the entire world based upon this understanding of a pandemic. And it was not just that it was spreading rapidly, but what was really happening was we thought people were dying en masse. Now you see it on the news. You watch the news every day. You think it was, the end of the world, when in reality, there are 650,000 people that die of the flu every year. As you probably know, they no longer require, since February, that you actually even do a test to say they died of COVID-19. So some of it is just speculation, whereas earlier they were much more rigid. You guys want to find a test because as we test more people, and you find more people who have the virus, but there's no symptoms whatsoever or mild symptoms, it changes the morbidity level, which changes whether or not we should be shutting down the whole world or economy. You wanted to show that. What have you learned so far? I think you're halfway through the test. You're about a week through it. Tell us what the test is about, what you're trying to find out, what you know so far, and what you hope to know in about a week.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the first time in as far as we know in the history of the world where there's been an antibody test offered to every resident in the county. And the results and the outpouring of support from the community have really been overwhelming. And we ended up with north of 70% of people participating. And the idea is that by testing at the beginning, just like you said, you find out how prevalent it is. And you find out if there are maybe more people that were asymptomatic than you expected, and maybe and that should have a huge ability to reduce fear, and it should be it's a very optimistic time, so that's good. The next thing that you get is 2 weeks later, which is now you do another round of testing. That next round of testing will show if someone went from negative to positive. That's called seroconverting. It means that they develop the antibodies during that interim period. And that's extremely valuable information because it shows what the rate of spread was and if we've slowed it and if it's been contained through the stay-at-home order. And also It allows us to then take those people that did seroconvert, do a PCR swab, find out if they're actively infectious and isolate them, and the whole town can basically get back to its new normal because you've really cleaned the population of the town and found out who has immunity and who hasn't been exposed.
What's interesting, though, is there's some material that came out today. There's been a great deal of analysis about those cities and states that did the shutdowns faster, which should have protected them more versus later on, and then places where they've done none of that. And so when you say seeing if the social isolation worked, we don't know what works. The body itself could be doing this, the body on its own, regardless of isolation. Isn't that true?
Well, I mean, I think this is the only way we'll know is if with the testing, and I think it's really important. I think that's why what the work is so important and the antibody tests are so important is because you get real actionable data to fill in those gaps. And I think that with that, the leaders of our country and these communities can make informed decisions, and the companies can make informed decisions about getting back to work and kind of getting rid of the fear and getting back to work.
There's a lot of in the media discussion of young people, could be carrying the virus and they could then infect other people. And so we've seen all of these distancing elements, especially for the elderly, based upon this. And yet I've talked to other virologists and they're saying, listen, if your body actually has the virus and your body builds antibodies and defeats it, it does not pass it on. That's a part of the law of virology. So I'm confused because I'm hearing some doctors on television talking about one aspect and others talking about another. Doesn't your test, won't it show that if you've built the antibodies then that you're in a position where you're not going to be a person that's going to pass it on?
Yeah, absolutely. The combination. So once you have these IgG antibodies, based on the studies that have been done thus far with the virus, you are in the clear, right? It's you should get a cookie. It's like you made it through and everything's great and like it's time to move along. I think the people that just to be safe with the double testing, the people that convert during that interim, I think that checking their family with the PCR and social isolation for that group that could be currently infectious is important. But the idea is, the 14-day period is sufficient that you're no longer actively infectious.
So if you're not actively infectious and you've built the antibodies, you're no risk to anyone else. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things that we're doing, and what you said is absolutely right. So basically, if you've developed the antibodies, I mean, what we're trying to do is separate into 3 different groups very quickly. One is, hey, you've been exposed to it, you're no longer infectious, you have antibodies, get back to work. You're, good for you. Like Lou said, you deserve a sticker. Then there's a second group, which is going to be the folks that don't have any antibodies, have never been exposed, and they're clean. So they're not infectious to others. So, they're not in danger to others. Now they have to know that they're still susceptible to catching it. So they have to take their own precautions, but, go back to the new normal. And then what you do is you isolate the people that are seroconverting or that, may need to be tested with PCR to see if they're actively infectious. And if they are, then quarantine them. So what you've done is you've isolated the people that need to, as opposed to isolate everyone, and let the rest of society kind of get back to a new normal. Now, one interesting thing that we've seen in San Miguel County is right now, I think we have about 8 PCR positively swabbed confirmed cases in that county. It's a county of about 8,000. So that's about 0.1%. What we've already seen in the antibody test, even though we haven't finished, is at least 1% with confirmed antibodies around there, and another 2% that look like they're high borderlines that may seroconvert. So you can already think about the ratio between what is confirmed via PCR, what we think is in the county, versus maybe it's a higher prevalence than we anticipate. And so it's actually around us much more than we expect.
So is it I'm really curious, isn't it possible that this virus has been around a lot longer than the last 3 months? I mean, I was reading an article I pointed out the other day that said, where does SARS go? And it was written 6 years ago. They talked about it's a coronavirus. Many things are. This is one pitch ago, but this is 6 years ago. And they said at least 2/3 of the population will have this virus in their body. The vast majority will never even know it. Their body will handle it. Some might feel mild flu-like symptoms, and some will have extreme symptoms. I mean, it's like 6 years ago this was written. Isn't it possible that this virus is around us and the vast majority of people don't have any impact? It certainly seems that way from the testing we're seeing so far when we get to people that are asymptomatic.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. And actually, I don't know enough to talk about it, but it does seem, and I've heard lots of reports and seen lots of studies that it has been around from beginning, definitely before the new year. And there's actually a question as to its origination and the fact that it was probably even circulating and just confused for the flu in many instances.
So the truth of the matter is it's something that might be people have cancer cells in their body right now. You can swab the back of somebody's throat and, you can find they got streptococcus germs, they don't have strep. It's an immunal situation really more than anything else because that's who's really dying in this case, whether they have it or not. The hospitalizations, not the case numbers, but the hospitalizations and then the deaths are the things that really matter to our society the most. And it seems to be an infinitely small number and getting smaller as we test more people, which should give people a little bit more hope.
I think that's really what it's about. I think the information is going to make is give people a tremendous amount of hope and a tremendous amount of empowerment. I'm a believer that people are extremely capable and extremely smart, but they can't make good decisions with bad information. So I think that the testing is critical. It allows us to know, and really evaluate this accurately and understand what the risk level is. And like you mentioned, and it's really about getting a handle on what real math is. Like what's real science, the real math, what's the real morbidity. And the only way we're going to know that is by testing. And when we test, what we're going to find out, like Mei Mei implied in the county and like we're going to see around the country, is that these rates are probably going to be higher than we think, and the morbidity associated will probably be lower. And that doesn't detract from the need for a vaccine to help immunocompromised people and other people that would be subjected to the illness. But it's I think it's really about getting people information.
So how do you plan to get the tests out? You're doing this initial study in Telluride. You're going to do the follow-up starting tomorrow, it sounds like, you'll be on your 2-week marker. So you'll have a sense of what's happened. What happens at the end of this? How do you get this out? I know you're working through the government. Are you going to put this through? Is a test going to be available through doctors? Is it available through Amazon? Like, how does this come to be?
So right now, we have a facility out in Long Island, New York, and we're producing about 100,000 tests a week. We're actually ramping up to 1 million a week next month, and we're hoping to bring actually on some additional sites to get our capacity up to 1 million a day. And what we're doing is actually working with lab partners to help be able to actually process that many tests as well. So, in terms of customers or what the end user faces, there's a whole slew of them. And the good news is that people recognize the need for testing and want to do it. There are big corporations that want to keep their employees safe and know that they can safely go back to work. I think one of the top priorities that we're working with are large hospital systems, people who have, essential workers, particularly healthcare workers, right, that are exposed day in, day in to COVID-19. And they want to know, do I have the antibodies? Can I get back to work? If you have your front line, like police officers, firefighters, if you have these guys go down, there's going to be so much more damage to our society than just the disease. So those are the folks that we're prioritizing. Of course, we want to test outbreak areas, such as New York City, New York State, and then afterwards, it's really just population. So we have types of orders where it's, hey, I want to test 30,000 people a day for the next 6 months, and they just want to get through them and see, okay, who's been exposed, who's got the antibodies, who's safe to go back to work. And it's a pretty systematic, methodical process.
If somebody owns a company, if somebody owns a company, I've introduced some, Salesforce and some people of that nature to you who are going to test, or maybe Time Magazine. I know they're investigating testing. So I'm trying to make those introductions. But if someone watching owns a company, or if they're just an individual and they want to get tested, what's their best bet? How do they go about finding out how they can get this done? Because they're going to hear about this and say, this makes sense to me. I want to know if I've been exposed. I want to know if I got antibodies, so I'm healthy. My body's doing great. I can let go and I can move forward. If I owned a company, small or big, or if I'm an individual, how would they go about getting access to this now or in the near future?
So if you're a company, definitely come talk to us, because we're actually working with a number of companies to put together a package where, we help essentially provide the testing and match up the processing capabilities. And depending on the size, we have companies of all different sizes, including, some top Fortune 500 companies that are interested in keeping their employees safely going. And if you're an individual, oftentimes it's easier through a clinical network. So what we're trying to do is actually establish large networks of doctors that will be offering this test in their clinic. So I'd ask your doctor.
How will they know it's your test versus another antibody test? What will it be known under the name of? Will it be under the name of COVAXX test, or what would it be under? So
it's a COVAXX test. So they should just ask for the COVAXX test.
And let me just add, if I could, the website is COVAXX.com. And if you're a company right now, the minimum size order, I believe, Lou and Mei Mei, and Lou, you can double click on this if you want, because this really is not for individuals. It's for provider networks and companies and governments, because you're dealing with national governments and governors. Can you talk a little about that, Lou, maybe?
Yeah, so because of the goal here is to have the biggest impact and get people back to the new normal as quickly as possible and get the economy up and running and people, not afraid. And so one of the keys there, and like Mei Mei touched on earlier really well, I think actually is, this is about, if you can test first responders, if you can test the thousands of police officers in Detroit and in New York and in LA that are not on the streets because they don't have actionable information, then you really go a long way in solving the problem and getting those people back to work and getting things moving. Same thing on the company level. Peter, as you were mentioning, we are trying to target these larger orders because of that for obvious reasons. And I think that's been really productive. And I think that it's about the average is about 9,200 it's about 100 plates. And that's where we're trying to focus on orders that size and bigger, and focus on communities and states and large companies. Start there.
So a person could go to their company, if it's a large company, or to their local mayor, governor, whoever, and say, we really want to do this and try to push this moving forward, while you're continuing to penetrate all the governments throughout the United States and obviously other parts of the world. Is that the fundamental way people can act on this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Then they go to the website and get the information and share it with those decision makers so they can get exposed to the effectiveness compared to any other form of testing. Let's talk about the vaccine if we can then, because this is really exciting. It's one thing to get the test, and obviously majority of people are having mild to no symptoms at all. We're hearing about the worst case scenarios. We've heard projections through the roof that are turning out to be inaccurate. People rush to hospitals out of their fear. They had a cough or a fever and overwhelmed our hospitals. But we just had Dr. Bob Harari on from New York, and he talked about 90% of those people were sent home, that they didn't have anything actionable. It was just the fear they got from the media. But there are people that are going to need some form of protection or some form of healing. And traditional vaccines, as I understand it, you got to use a form of the virus itself. You guys have a different approach, and it's a platform you've proven before. Tell us a little about the vaccine, what would make it superior, and what's the timing, which I know is the question everybody has in mind.
Yeah, so we've developed our vaccine platform for over 20 years. The traditional way of a vaccine, just like you were saying, Tony, is you basically take the virus, you beat it up or you kill it, and then you reintroduce it to a body to train your body to recognize it, so that when it actually sees it, it develops antibodies and quashes it. What we do is we never touch the actual virus. So we do a synthetic version. So we make with a bunch of synthetic peptides, and we mimic what a virus looks like.
Like the resonance of it.
Yeah, well, we basically choose a part of the virus that we want to attack, and we kind of mimic the biology with chemicals, synthetic peptides, and then we attach it to our platform technology, and we use that and inject that into people, and we kind of trick the body into thinking that it is a real virus. So it trains it to develop antibodies and this long-term memory, and that's basically the immunity that we generate. We've shown it in pigs. It's kind of a funny thing, but they get a lot of infections, and there's some really virulent diseases that kill swine. And so, we've been able to protect pigs from lots of infectious diseases and very virulent ones. And one other thing with that is they have mutations as well. So one of the best parts of our technology is once we get the sequence of a virus, we can really rapidly change it. And because we're a chemical process, we can scale up very quickly. So when these swine, when a swine infectious disease kind of mutated, we took that and we, within 2 months, had over 100 million doses back on the market to treat and protect them.
And you've done about 5 billion pigs. Is that right? Did I hear that number? Is that accurate?
Yeah, we vaccinated almost 5 billion pigs. So we can do it at scale. We can do it at scale. Right now we sell for, just under $1 a dose.
And what would a traditional vaccine, so people have a reality check of the difference in price and why this is so valuable to get to a mass audience? What's the difference in price? And can you clarify why is this safer? And because of that, what's the timing on a vaccine like this from your perspective?
So in terms of price, right now we manufacture over 500 million doses a year for animal health indications. We sell them for less than $1 a dose and still have very healthy margins. So it's super scalable. I think one of the biggest advantages is our ability to actually produce that many vaccines. You might see in the papers, a lot of people are basically investing in production capability now because they're afraid that, you may have something that works, but can you scale? And at the end of the day, it really only matters if you can scale to the masses. And that's how you develop, and that's how vaccines have worked in the past. In terms of timing, one of the hallmarks of our vaccine is its safety profile. So the reason why we took over such a large market share in swine vaccines was because we were not only efficacious, but unbelievably safe. We've brought our platform into humans. We've done 4 clinical trials and other indications, and we're actually heading into phase 3 for another program. And it's safety is a hallmark of ours. So, what we're looking to do is we're finishing animal testing right now, and we're targeting to get this vaccine into human trials this summer. So pretty quick.
Let me slow this down 1 second for everybody, because you said a few very important things. Number one, this platform that your sister company, Vaccinity, has created, COVAXX is using that same platform. So this platform has been in humans before. And so you expect that it will be safe in humans once again. And we're talking about one of the reasons that a traditional vaccine, we've been hearing about vaccines from the FDA and on the news, could take 18 months, is because you're worried about the unintended consequences. If you give, 100 million Americans or, billions of people around the world a vaccine, are you causing something that you didn't expect? And we have companies like Moderna right now, which is a completely different approach to an RNA-based vaccine, which has never been done before. But you've done this for hundreds, maybe thousands of patients in this platform already, and you had zero downside. Just make sure thus far.
Yeah. So listen, I actually root for everyone in this. So if someone else's vaccine works, that's great. Because frankly, this is a human crisis, right? And so whoever can help, this is a big ecosystem, and we're just a part of it. I think one of the differentiators of ours is that we've actually commercialized off of our platform. So we know how to scale up, and we know how to manufacture, and that's something that's not easy, right? In terms of being safe, yeah, we've been safe in lots and lots of people over 3 years of repeat dosing. So we haven't had much side effects, and so at the very least, we understand our platform is safe. And we've had experience, in fact, in coronaviruses because we developed a vaccine and an antibody test against SARS. Thankfully, SARS never came back. So those were never, pushed forward, but we have experience in doing this.
If you're testing in the summer, what's the reality in terms of when a vaccine might be made available under the accelerated FDA approach?
Yeah, so this is unprecedented times, Tony. I think, the FDA was unprecedented in their guidance for antibody tests, and so they allow us to move forward even pre-EUA. And so with vaccines, it's also unprecedented. Traditionally, like Tony Fauci says, it's going to be 12 to 18 months, likely. But right now, if you're safe and you can show that you're safe, there may be an accelerated pathway where basically, so long as you show that you have neutralizing antibodies that neutralize that virus, it could be to the masses by the beginning of next year. So 6 months.
So it's a potential because, the fear that people have, and again, the numbers are very different than what were promoted, but still the fear is, Tony Fauci talks about this coming back seasonally again, and people, without realizing, without tests, without knowing real morbidities, we'd overreact again. Now, hopefully we get the testing that gives us the real numbers. We're already starting to see what the real numbers are, sometimes 1,000th of what was being promoted or believed in. But if we got a vaccine as well, it's a different game. So perhaps, are you saying perhaps this could be done in time for the next season?
Yeah, I think that's what everyone's going for. I think that it'll definitely, that I think is what society is aiming for. And I think we have all the pieces together to make that happen.
That's really encouraging.
So I got to jump in just because I can't help it. The answer is that they're unprecedented times, and the FDA absolutely has the ability to make this happen as fast as possible. We're in the process of drafting our protocol for our IND submission with them. This is the vaccine right here. So it's not like far away. It's in my hand. It's something that we can do now. So the question isn't like, how long do we, and I could make 100 million of these in a month if they said go. So what we need is that's where the vision needs to be in terms of how we do this. And we need to seize the moment and the opportunity to really solve the problem.
And so this summer, you'll start to have human trials. How big will the human trial be, if I ask?
A few hundred people, a few hundred healthy volunteers.
And guys, this has been in animal testing thus far. And in animals, it's been producing great sizable responses, titers. You've been generating antibodies in these animals. You can measure that. You've actually, if I remember correctly, you tried something like a couple of dozen different approaches, have been narrowing it down to the most effective vaccine. Is that correct?
A couple dozen vaccines, and we've wanted to make sure that we get the highest titers, so the highest response from the immune system, and that those antibodies target where we want. So we're down to our favorites. So
that's great. That's great. Well, this is so encouraging, both at getting to some real numbers, so we're not operating out of fear or overreacting to things that affect everybody health-wise, the economy, and so forth. And really exciting to hear you guys are working on a solution whose base appears to be very safe and that perhaps can be acted on very, very rapidly. What else does would you want the public to know about either the testing or the vaccines or the issue at hand, as well as how some of this platform you've developed can affect or impact other diseases, because you certainly have worked in those areas over the last 30 years as well?
Yeah, so I mean, if we weren't here talking about diagnostics and vaccines for COVID, I'd be telling you that we should have been meeting with the FDA to get their blessing and guidance on our registrational trial, on our final trial for an Alzheimer's vaccine. So we have an Alzheimer's vaccine. We have a universal cholesterol vaccine, which is against PCSK9. We've got Parkinson's vaccines that have just finished or are finishing their phase 1 trial. So these are things that are disruptive for the world and have an opportunity to really combat chronic illness in a cost-effective way and a disruptive way. And we're doing our best here to fight the fight and democratize and demonetize health as best as we can. And I think we have a really powerful platform, and it's been displayed, and saved millions and millions and billions of pigs' lives. And it's now, been helping hundreds of people, and I can't wait to roll it out and be able to help billions of people.
Lou and Mei Mei are extraordinary entrepreneurs who have really just created a vision of where they want to go and have been making that vision into reality. Neither of them are physicians or classical scientists by background. They have an incredible science team behind them, But let me just ask, what's been able to make you both so successful? Because you're not traditional in any way, shape, or form. If I called you traditional, you'd probably hate me for it. So what's been what you're doing is massively outside the norm. Could you take a moment and just share some mentorship with Tony and my community here watching this?
I think it's hard to talk about myself, but I think you just have to care, right? You have to care and you really believe in what you're doing, because it's not easy to do what we're trying to do, right? It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of teamwork. And so you really have to find something that you're passionate about and that you think makes a difference. Lou, and we're married, taught me how to see bigger than just around me, right? And our family. So it's like, this is a chance to save many, many lives, to make an impact way beyond yourself. And I think if you have that greater purpose, you dedicate more of yourself and you don't give up until you get it done. So that's kind of just where we come from, and we'll do whatever it takes to get it done and help people. And, there's lots of sacrifices that are made, our kids sacrifice, our friends. But if you have that greater purpose, you have a higher chance of getting there.
And your mom is have to be an influence. And your mom and dad together, I guess, started the company 30 years ago. Tell us the breakthroughs that brought her forward, just so we get a sense of the history before we wrap up, because it sounds like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah. So my mother is the chief scientific officer, and she was the first Asian woman ever to be accepted to Rockefeller University. She came over, and she basically never took no for an answer. If someone said it was impossible, she said, "Why is it impossible?" And she's the hardest working person and never is dissuaded. So she never thinks that she can't do something, and that's a really powerful thing to grow up with. And sometimes, you're luckier when you don't know what you can't do. And that's actually something that Lou and my mother have a lot in common. So
shout out to your mom and dad for all of us, for helping you to have those values that are helping you create these kind of breakthroughs.
Hey, Lou, you're someone who, in my mind, is one of the most extraordinary manifestors of the future I've ever met. A lot, just, literally going from, we should test all of San Miguel County, to making that happen, to on the phone, every other hour with a different governor and a different head of a nation and a different Fortune 50 CEO. It's just as an entrepreneur here, a couple of thoughts of what you've experienced, learned, or what's driven you to think at this level and scale like nobody else.
Well, when I was little, my dad used to say what he missed about being young was not knowing what he couldn't do. And so I've been determined to never know that.
That's awesome.
And the way I look out the window, or I look out the door, and I see if there's a reality that you don't like, change it. And so the idea is that it's about doing the things that are right, and finding the big things, the things that move the needle and change lives, and then just doing them. Right. And when people say you can't, or there's a reason, or whatever, it's almost like it should be energizing. And it should be energizing because, like, that's energy that they're putting out there, and you can use that energy to make it, you can turn that right around and make it the most positive thing that fuels your fire. And if you know that, and you really believe it, and you put all of your energy into it, the world gets made by that energy.
You're both, you and your family are closest friends of mine and my family, and Tony as well. This is a love fest, but this is inspiration. I think we're living in a time where individuals can change the world. COVAXX as a team is a very small team of individuals who have potential to do this. And besides the implications of the diagnostics and the vaccine, I just want this to become inspiration for everybody watching about not giving up and not taking no and not thinking you can't make a difference, because we all can.
Without a doubt. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope this has been helpful to you, inspiring to you, both at a business level, but most importantly, freeing you from the virus of fear that seemed to have consumed so many, showing you that the solutions are here, the answers are coming.